buried alive by her stepmother. A cowboy dug her out and gave her a name. The shovel hit something that wasn't dirt. I know that sound. You work enough ground, you know the difference. A root gives a kind of wet resistance, a rock rings dull, a stone cracks clean. This was none of those. This was a hollow knock, like knocking on a door, and my whole body went still before my mind caught up to why. It was maybe 2 hours past first light. November. The kind of morning where your breath hangs and the cold has already worked its way through your gloves and your boots and settled into the knuckle joints. I was digging a post hole out along the east fence line. The old corner post had heaved with the frost, and the wire was starting to sag, and the ranch wasn't going to fix itself. Hadn't ever once fixed itself in the 7 years I'd been the only man running it. My name is Callum Reese. Was 51 years old that morning, nobody's husband, nobody's father. The kind of man a town remembers when they need a fence strung or a horse shod or something heavy moved and forgets the rest of the time. I pulled the shovel back and went down on one knee in the cold mud. I don't know what I thought I'd find. Probably I didn't think at all, just moved, the way your hands sometimes know before the rest of you does. Scraped the dirt back with my fingers. About 14 inches down, 2 feet maybe, there was a crate. Old pine shipping crate, the kind you'd haul dry goods in. Lid nailed down with 4 nails, though only 2 of them held anymore. I got the pry bar from the fence wire coil and popped it. The girl inside was not dead. She was curled like a caught thing, both arms pulled to her chest, her hair full of dirt, a thin wool coat over her that was not nearly enough for November. Eyes closed. For one bad second I thought I was wrong about the dead part, but then I put my palm flat on her sternum and felt it, the faintest rise, slow as sleeping. I got her out. I'll tell you that part plain. I lifted her out of that box the way you'd lift something that might break, got her up against my chest, and I walked back to the house. Quarter mile, maybe a little more. I don't recall it much. I recall the weight of her. She was maybe 25 and thin in the way that means a long time without enough, and I recall that she didn't make a sound the whole walk. I put her on the cot in the back room, the one I'd kept made up since my sister used to visit, stoked the stove, put 2 blankets over her and then a third, boiled water, sat in the chair and waited. She didn't wake until evening. I was at the table when I heard it, a sharp intake of breath, the sound of someone remembering they're alive, went to the doorway. She had pushed herself up against the wall, both hands flat on the cot mattress, eyes wide and fixed on me with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite recognition. Just watching. Trying to read what I was. I held still. "You're inside," I said. "You're warm, nobody's going to put you back." She didn't answer. She watched me for a long time, long enough that the stove popped twice and the light outside went full dark, and then very slowly she looked at her own hands, turned them over, looked at the dirt still under her nails. I brought her water. She drank it. I brought her bread and a bowl of beans, and she ate like someone who had decided to be suspicious of the food but couldn't hold out for long. I sat on the far side of the table and didn't crowd her and didn't talk much. She asked for water again, and I got it. "What's your name?" I asked eventually, hours in. She went quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone thinking, the quiet of someone who's been told the answer is complicated. "I don't have one," she said. I let that sit. "All right," I said. "I mean, I had one." She took it back, that's what she said. She said she was taking it back. The stepmother. I wouldn't learn the details for weeks, and I'll get to them, but that night I understood the broad shape of it from those 2 sentences alone, from the tone of it. There are certain kinds of cruelty that don't need explaining. You hear the shape in a person's voice and you know. "Well," I said, "you'll need something to go by." She looked at me, still wary, still measuring. "There was a girl who used to live in this valley," I said. "Long time ago, she was called Nora. She was a decent, stubborn woman who outlasted everyone who underestimated her." I paused. "It's yours if you want it." She was quiet for a moment. "Was she real?" "Real enough." She looked down at the blanket. "Nora," she said, just the word like she was checking the weight of it. "All right." That was the first night. The second day she couldn't stand for long without her legs going out from under her. The cold had gotten into her more than I'd first thought. 2 of her toes on the left foot had gone dark and needed watching, and her hands had the deep ache in them that takes weeks to leave. She slept most of the day. I kept the stove up and went out to tend the horses and came back and she was still there, which sounds like a simple thing, but wasn't. I'd half expected her to be gone. I don't know why I would have been surprised. I'd given her no reason to stay except warmth and bread and the absence of cruelty. And maybe that's not a low bar, but she'd been in the ground, and a body that's been in the ground will sometimes do strange and frightened things when it gets free. But she was there, awake this time, sitting up with the blanket around her shoulders, watching the window. "There are things I ought to tell you," she said when I came in. "You don't owe me a word," I said. "I know I don't." She looked at me steadily. She had that way, not hostile, not soft, just level, like she decided something and was going forward from there. "But I'm going to tell you anyway." Her name, the original one, was Alara. Her mother had named her for some star, or said she had, the kind of thing a woman says to a daughter before she dies young. Her father had remarried when she was 9. The stepmother was a particular kind of woman, not dramatic in her cruelty, not theatrical. The kind who does it quietly and calls it discipline and keeps the neighbors from seeing. Worked Alara hard, kept her separate. When the father died, fever, 2 winters back, there was the land to think about and a stepdaughter who could make a legal claim on it. "So she waited," Alara said, "until I'd been sick long enough that I wasn't going to remember it right. Then they said I'd died in the night, she and the man she was going to marry. They put me in the ground while I was still under the fever." She stopped, looked at her hands again. "I don't know how long I was under, long enough that I stopped thinking and just waited for it to end one way or the other." The stove ticked. "The land," I said, "is hers now, I expect." Flat, not bitter in the way you'd expect, just flat, like she was giving me a report of weather. "We'll see about that," I said. She looked at me. "You don't have to do anything," she said. "I'm not asking for anything." "I know you're not." That was, I think, what made her pause, not the offer, the fact that I wasn't waiting for a thank you. I wasn't tallying. I was just going to go to town and speak to whoever needed speaking to, because a woman had been put in the ground against her will and her land had been stolen from her. And that was a wrong that needed addressing, and I was apparently the man standing here. That was the whole logic of it. "Why?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. "Because it's the right thing," I said. "And because I've got 7 years of doing things the right thing by myself and I'm tired, and this is the first time in a good while that there's been something worth doing." I went to town the next morning, found the county recorder, found the justice of the peace, found the man who ran the land office. The stepmother and her intended hadn't moved fast enough on the legal side. They'd held the funeral but hadn't yet filed the death record or transferred the deed, which meant Alara Voss, and I used that name, the original one, in every office I walked into, was still legally among the living. It was not a fast process. It was not clean. The stepmother denied it entirely, and her man stood behind her in the office and called me a liar and called Alara deranged from the fever, and I stood there and listened to it and said what I had to say, and the recorder looked at me over his spectacles for a long time. "Bring the girl in," he said. I brought her in 2 days later, once she could walk without holding the wall. She came in and stood in front of that recorder and answered every question he had in a voice that did not shake once. I sat in the chair behind her and didn't say anything. I was watching the back of her neck, the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself, and there was something in it that I recognized, not from anyone else but from myself. The way a person stands when they've been told repeatedly they're nothing and they've decided, somewhere private, that they're not. The recorder wrote for a while. Then he looked up and said the death record would not be filed. She came back to the ranch with me. I want to be honest about how that went, which is to say slowly and quietly, and without anything being said directly about what it was. She took the back room. I had the mane. We worked alongside each other the way 2 people work when they're both useful and they both know it. She had a way with the horses I hadn't expected, and she could cook things out of near nothing that I'd been ruining for years. And in the evenings, she'd sit by the stove with a book she'd found on my shelf, and I'd work on harness or accounts at the table. I'll tell you that it was not a lonely winter. For the first time in a long time, it was not. She had a thing she'd do early on, a kind of stillness that would come over her at odd moments when something reminded her of the box. A particular kind of dark, or being in a room with the door closed, or once a smell from outside she couldn't place. I learned to read the signs, didn't make a fuss of it. If she went to a window, I'd just move to somewhere near it, not talking, just present. a body in the room that was not a threat. Sometimes she'd breathe out slowly, and that would be the end of it. Once she reached out and put her hand on my arm without looking at me, just for a moment, just to check that I was solid. I was solid. That's what I knew how to be. Not much else, maybe, after all those years, not quick with words, not much to look at, not the kind of man anybody had ever written a letter about. But solid. Present. The kind of man who goes to the county recorder when there's something that needs fixing and says what needs to be said without flinching. The kind of man who keeps the stove up and the door unlatched. She seemed to think that was something. Spring came late that year. The land claim on her family's homestead took until April to resolve, and even then it resolved imperfectly. The stepmother and her man had quietly sold off the better portion to a third party who had clean hands, and what Alara got back was the house and the eastern pasture and a stand of timber that had some value. Not what had been stolen, but something. She came back from the final meeting at the land office, and she stood in the yard in the late daylight, and I watched her from the fence I was mending, and she looked at the mountains for a while. Just stood there. The way a person looks at something they've finally been allowed to look at. I went back to work on the fence. After a while, she came over and put her elbows on the top rail beside me. I could go back to it, she said, the homestead. Yes, I said. She was quiet. That's what you're not saying, I said. I'm saying it fine, she said. I could go back to it, I don't know that I want to. I kept working, twisted the wire, got it seated, reached for the next clip. I've been thinking, she said, about what kind of place this is, your ranch. What kind is it? Solid, she said. I looked at her then. She was looking at the fence post, then at my hands, then at my face. That same level look she'd had from the second night, when she decided to trust me and gone forward from there without a lot of ceremony. I'd have to earn my way, she said. I won't be kept. You've been earning it since January, I said. The horses alone. She almost smiled, almost. Well, she said. Well, I said. She reached out and put her hand over mine on the fence wire and held it there. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at the mountains again, the way she'd been looking at them earlier. But her hand was warm on mine in the cold April air, and she held on, and I didn't pull away, and that was that. The spring that year was green and wet after a dry fall and a punishing winter, and the grass came in fast, and the creek ran full, and the horses put on good weight. Alara had a way of being in a place that made the place feel used properly. The yard was cleaner, the saddles were kept up. There was always something right on the stove. There's a morning I remember from that May. We were at the table early, before full light, and she was reading and I was going over the account book for the month, and the lamp was between us and the window was gray and just starting to show. She looked up at some point. I don't know why, I hadn't said anything, and she looked at me for a moment with an expression I won't try to name. Just looked at me, like she was checking something she already knew the answer to. What? I said. Nothing, she said. Go back to your books. And I did. But I'll tell you what I felt in that moment, if I'm being straight about it. I felt like a man who'd been invisible for a very long time, and who had, somehow, without quite understanding when or how it had happened, become visible. Not to a town, not to a record keeper, not to anyone who could do anything useful with the information. Just to her, just that. The one pair of eyes that had decided I was worth looking at. After 7 years alone on that piece of ground, that was not a small thing. That was not a small thing at all. I think about that morning sometimes when people ask me how I came to have a partner, or how we came to get where we are. What to say? The honest answer is that I dug a post hole and found someone's daughter in the ground, and I carried her to my house and kept the stove up and went to town and said what needed saying and kept being present when it mattered. And she, a woman who had every reason to trust nothing and nobody, decided I was the kind of man she could build something with. I didn't give her a home. She's not the kind of woman you give things to. She chose it. She looked at me and at this place and decided. That's the part I come back to. In all the years before, I was the man nobody looked at twice. Too quiet, too old before my time, too alone on that piece of ground without anything to show but a good fence line and horses that were properly kept. And then she came out of the ground and she looked at me and she looked at this place and she said solid. I don't need much more than that. The ranch is in better shape now than it's been in 15 years. We added a section east of the creek last fall. The horses are good. There is, most evenings, something right on the stove, and a lamp on the table, and the two of us in the lamplight, and the mountains outside the window going from gold to gray to dark. Some mornings I still go out early to check the fence line. Habit. And sometimes I stop at that corner post, the new one, the one that replaced the one that had heaved, and I stand there a minute in the cold, looking at the ground. What's under there now is just earth. I fixed that fence in November. I fixed it right. And what came out of the ground that morning is in the house with the lamp on, and her name is Nora.